To the townspeople, climbing the mountain to face the beast of Blackwater Creek was a suicide mission. Rumors of unwashable blood on his hands painted him as a monster, a walking death sentence. Yet, when the shadows lengthened and gunfire erupted, the very man feared by the masses became Fiona Miller's only shield against the grave. When she questioned his dangerous nature, he offered no denial, only a steely gaze and a vow, only to those who'd hurt you. The stagecoach rattled so violently that Fiona Miller bit her tongue, tasting iron just as the driver hollered, "Whoa!" Dust coated the inside of her throat. She coughed, patting the pocket of her gingham dress where the letter rested. It was crumpled now, worn soft by anxious fingers over the last 3 weeks. Caleb Kincaid, Blackwater Creek, Montana Territory. The door swung open, and the heat of late August hit her like a physical blow. Fiona stepped down into the mud of the main street. It wasn't much of a town. A saloon that smelled of stale beer and sawdust, a general store with fly-specked windows, and a livery stable. "This is it, miss," the driver said, tossing her leather trunk into the dirt with a careless thud. He looked at her, his eyes narrowing under the brim of his hat. "You waitin' on someone?" "My husband," Fiona said, though the word felt foreign on her tongue. "Or my husband-to-be, Mr. Kincaid." The driver froze. He actually took a step back, wiping his hands on his trousers as if the mere mention of the name had dirtied them. "Kincaid? You mean Caleb Kincaid, the one they call the Butcher?" Fiona's stomach dropped. His letters were kind. "Letters don't show the scars, ma'am. And they don't show the graves." The driver climbed back onto his perch quickly, gathering the reins. "If he ain't here, you best get back in. I'll take you to the next town for free. You don't want to be waiting on that man." "I have nowhere else to go," she whispered, more to herself than him. The whip cracked, and the coach tore away, leaving her standing alone in the center of the street. She felt the eyes before she saw them. Men on the porch of the saloon had stopped drinking. A woman sweeping the boardwalk across the street had paused, clutching her broom like a weapon. Fiona dragged her trunk towards the general store. She needed water, and perhaps a place to sit out of the sun. The bell above the door jingled. The shopkeep, a balding man with a stained apron named Mr. Henderson, looked up. He smiled initially, a practiced merchant's grin, until he saw her dusty travel clothes and the utter lack of escort. "Help you, miss?" "I'm waiting for Mr. Kincaid," she said, lifting her chin. She refused to let them see her tremble. "Has he been down today?" Mr. Henderson's face went slack. He leaned over the counter, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You're the mail-order bride. We thought it was a joke." Hiram Grady said Kincaid finally lost his mind completely. "Who is Hiram Grady?" "The man who owns this town," Henderson muttered, glancing toward the door as if checking for spies. "Look, miss, you seem like a decent woman. Kincaid, he ain't for civilized folk. He lives up on the ridge. They say he killed a man with his bare hands just for trespassing. They say he skinned a wolf alive because it looked at him wrong. He's dangerous." "He wrote that he needed help with the harvest and a companion," Fiona insisted, though her voice wavered. "He sent money. Good money." "Blood money," a voice boomed from the doorway. Fiona turned. A man stood there, silhouetted by the harsh sunlight. He was dressed in a suit that cost more than her entire life's earnings, a gold watch chain glinting against his vest. He had a face that was handsome in a predatory way, sharp features, slicked back hair, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I am Hiram Grady," the man said, stepping inside. The shopkeep scurried back, looking terrified. Grady looked Fiona up and down, lingering uncomfortably on her waist. "And you are making a grave mistake." "My mistakes are my own, sir," Fiona said, tightening her grip on her reticule. "Not in my town," Grady said smoothly. "Kincaid is a squatter on land that rightfully belongs to the railroad. He is a savage. I can offer you a room at the hotel. A job. You don't need to go up that mountain." "I made a promise," Fiona said, "and I keep my word." Grady's smile vanished. Then God help you, girl, because when the snow comes, nobody goes up to the ridge, and nobody comes down. You'll be trapped with a beast." Before she could answer, the light in the doorway was blocked out completely. It wasn't just a shadow, it was an eclipse. A man stepped onto the wooden floorboards, and the air in the room seemed to vanish. He had to duck to clear the doorframe. He was massive, broad-shouldered, and thick-chested, wearing a duster coat made of worn leather that looked like it had seen 1,000 storms. His hat was pulled low, but beneath it, Fiona saw a beard the color of iron and midnight, unkempt and wild. But it was the scar that held her gaze. It ran from his temple, jagged and white, cutting through his left eyebrow and disappearing into the beard. The shop fell dead silent. Even Hiram Grady took a step back, his hand hovering near the pistol at his hip. The giant looked at Grady, then at the shopkeep, and finally his gaze landed on Fiona. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Fiona!" His voice was like gravel grinding together. "Yes," she squeaked. She cleared her throat and stood taller. "Yes, Mr. Kincaid." He didn't smile. He didn't offer a hand. He simply nodded once, grabbed a sack of flour and a box of nails from the counter, threw a coin that hit the wood with a heavy thud, and turned to her. "Let's go." He walked out. He didn't check to see if she was following. He didn't offer to carry her trunk. Fiona looked at Grady, who was watching her with a mix of pity and malice. "He won't protect you," Grady sneered. "He can't even protect himself." Fiona gritted her teeth, grabbed the handle of her heavy trunk, and dragged it out into the dust. Caleb Kincaid was already mounting a massive black stallion. A mule stood tied next to it. He watched her struggle with the trunk for a moment. Then, with a sigh that sounded like a growl, he dismounted. He walked over, picked up the 100-pound trunk with one hand, as if it were filled with feathers, and lashed it to the mule. "Ride or walk?" he asked. I can ride." He lifted her by the waist. His hands were enormous, engulfing her, and set her sideways on the mule. "Don't speak to Grady," he said. It was the first full sentence he'd spoken to her. "Why?" she asked, adjusting her skirts. Caleb swung himself onto his horse. He looked towards the saloon, where men were watching them with dark intent. "Because the devil speaks with a silver tongue," Caleb said, "and I ain't got the patience to cut it out today." The ride up the mountain took 4 hours. They left the dusty heat of the valley floor and ascended into the cool, pine-scented air of the Rockies. The trail was treacherous, narrow switchbacks with a sheer drop on one side that made Fiona dizzy if she looked down. Caleb rode ahead, his posture rigid. He checked the ridgeline constantly, his rifle resting easily across his saddle horn. He didn't speak. He didn't ask her about her journey. He didn't ask if she was hungry. Fiona's mind raced. Had she made a mistake? In his letters, he had sounded lonely but gentle. He had written about the beauty of the sunrise and the quiet of the winter. "I am a man of few words," he had written, "but I have a home that needs warmth, and I have respect for a woman who works hard." The man in front of her seemed capable of snapping a pine tree in half. They arrived at the cabin just as the sun began to dip behind the peaks, painting the sky in violent shades of violet and blood orange. The cabin was not the shack she had feared. It was a sturdy, sprawling structure made of massive logs, with a stone chimney that promised a roaring fire. There was a barn, a well-tended garden, and a porch that overlooked the entire valley. It was beautiful, isolated, terrifyingly so, but beautiful. Caleb helped her down. His touch was firm, but impersonal. "Supper's inside, stew left in the pot," he said. He began unhitching the horses. "Aren't you coming in?" Fiona asked, hugging her shawl around herself against the sudden chill. "Got chores?" Fiona went inside. The interior was clean, shockingly so for a man living alone. A handmade quilt lay on the rocking chair. The table was scrubbed pine, but as she lit the lantern, the light cast long shadows, and her eyes fell on the mantel. There was a daguerreotype photograph, face down, and next to it, a massive Bowie knife its blade stained dark. Not rust. Old blood. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The door creaked open behind her. Caleb filled the frame, carrying her trunk. He saw her staring at the knife. He walked past her, set the trunk down at the foot of a narrow bed in the corner, and then walked to the mantel. He picked up the knife, sheathed it, and put it in a drawer. "It's for skinning," he said flatly. "Don't touch it. It's sharp." "Mr. Kincaid," Fiona said, her voice trembling. "Everyone in town. They said, I know what they said." He turned to face her. In the lantern light, the scar looked less angry, but his eyes were exhausted. "They said I'm a killer." "Are you?" The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. The wind howled outside, rattling the window pane. "I've killed," he said slowly. "This is the West, Fiona. Men kill for gold, for land, for sport." He took a step toward her and she flinched. He stopped immediately, his face hardening. "I won't hurt you," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "The arrangement stands. You cook, you clean, you help with the garden. You sleep in that bed. I sleep in the loft. If you want to leave in the spring, I'll give you the money to go back east. I ain't looking for a wife in the biblical sense. Not unless you want it." Fiona let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. You don't? Look at me, Fiona." He gestured to his face, the scar, the rough beard. "I know what I am. I needed help to keep this land. Grady wants it. The government wants it. A man alone is easy to pick off. A man with a family. That gives the law pause." "So I am a shield?" she asked, feeling a strange mix of relief and insult. "You're a partner," he corrected, "if you can handle it." He turned to the stove and ladled stew into 2 wooden bowls. He placed one in front of her and sat down, bowing his head. "We pray before we eat," he muttered. Fiona bowed her head, watching him through her lashes. He looked like a mountain bear trying to sit at a tea party. "Amen," he said, and began to eat. "Mr. Kincaid, Caleb," she started. "Who is Hiram Grady? Why did he warn me?" Caleb's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "Hiram Grady is a snake who thinks he's a lion. He wants the water rights on this ridge. He sent men up here before to scare me off." "And what happened to them?" Caleb looked at her. "They went back down. All of them?" He didn't answer. He just tore a piece of bread and chewed it slowly. Later that night, Fiona lay in the narrow bed, the quilt pulled up to her chin. The cabin was dark, save for the embers in the fireplace. She could hear Caleb moving around in the loft above, the creak of the floorboards, the thud of his boots dropping, then silence. Suddenly, a sound shattered the quiet, a high-pitched scream from outside. Fiona bolted upright. "Caleb!" He was down the ladder in a second, barefoot, wearing only his trousers and a Henley shirt, a Winchester rifle in his hands. He didn't look sleepy. He looked ready. "Stay down," he hissed. He moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. "What is it?" she whispered. "Cougar," he said, lowering the rifle slightly. "Just a cat. It's hunting." He turned to look at her. Her hair was loose, cascading over her shoulders, and her eyes were wide with fear. For a moment, the hardness in his face softened. He looked away quickly, as if the sight of her burned him. "Go to sleep, Fiona. Nothing gets in here. I built this place to keep the wild out." "And the town?" she asked softly. "Does it keep the town out?" He looked at the door, where a heavy iron bar rested across the frame. "The town is the wild," he said. Up here is the only peace you'll find." But Fiona didn't sleep, because as Caleb climbed back up to the loft, she saw him take the pistol from the table and place it under his pillow. He was expecting a war, and she had just walked right into the middle of the battlefield. September bled into October, painting the aspen trees on the mountain in brilliant strokes of gold. Fiona had fallen into a rhythm, though the distance between her and Caleb remained as vast as the canyon below. She worked until her hands were raw. She learned to milk the ornery cow, to preserve vegetables for the winter, and to wash clothes in the freezing creek water. Caleb watched her, always watching, but he rarely interfered. He seemed to be waiting for her to break, to pack her trunk and demand a ride back to the stagecoach. But Fiona Miller had grown up in a tenement in Chicago. She knew what it was to be hungry, and she knew what it was to be unwanted. The silence of the mountain was better than the noise of the city. One Tuesday, Caleb was up on the North Ridge repairing a fence line that had been mysteriously cut for the third time that week. Fiona took the laundry basket down to the creek. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and impending snow. She knelt by the water, scrubbing Caleb's heavy flannel shirt against the washboard. "You scrub hard for a woman who doesn't belong here." Fiona froze. The voice didn't belong to Caleb. It was high, reedy, and mocking. She turned slowly. A man was sitting on a rock 10 yards away, whittling a stick with a long knife. He wore a dirty bowler hat and a dust-caked coat. He was smiling, but his eyes were dead. "Who are you?" Fiona asked, standing up. She reached into her apron pocket, her fingers closing around the small folding knife Caleb had given her for cutting herbs. It felt pathetically small. "Name's Silas," the man said, standing up. He was taller than he looked, sitting down. "Mr. Grady sent me to check on you. Said he was worried the beast might have eaten you by now." "I am fine," Fiona said, her voice steady despite the thumping of her heart. "You are trespassing. Mr. Kincaid doesn't take kindly to trespassers." Silas laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Kincaid is fixing a fence I cut. He's miles away. See, that's the thing about mountain men. They think they know the land, but they don't know people." He took a step toward her, then another. "Mr. Grady has a standing offer," Silas said, flicking his knife. $500 for the woman who walks away from Kincaid, and a guarantee of safety." "I'm not for sale," Fiona spat. "Everyone's for sale, darling." Silas lunged. He was fast, but Fiona was desperate. She threw the heavy, wet flannel shirt at his face. It slapped him wetly, blinding him for a split second. Fiona turned and ran up the path towards the cabin. "You little witch!" Silas roared. She heard his boots pounding the dirt behind her. She pushed her legs harder, her lungs burning. The cabin seemed miles away. She screamed Caleb's name, though she knew he couldn't hear her. She reached the clearing. Silas was right behind her. She felt his hand grab the back of her dress, the fabric tearing. She stumbled, falling hard onto the dirt. Silas was on top of her in an instant, his weight crushing. "You want to play rough? I can play rough." He raised his hand to strike her. Fiona squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the pain. Crack! The weight was gone. Fiona gasped, scrambling backward into the dirt. Silas was flying through the air, thrown like a rag doll. He hit the side of the barn with a sickening crunch and slumped to the ground. Caleb stood there. He was heaving, his chest rising and falling like a bellows. He wasn't holding a gun. He had done that with his bare hands. Silas groaned, trying to reach for his knife. Caleb crossed the distance in 2 strides. He stomped on Silas's hand, shattering the bones. Silas screamed, a high, piercing sound that echoed off the canyon walls. Caleb grabbed Silas by the throat and lifted him off the ground, pinning him against the rough wood of the barn. Caleb's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The scar on his face seemed to pulse. "I told you," Caleb snarled, his voice so low it shook the ground. "I told you what would happen if you came near my house." "Grady," Silas choked out, his face turning purple. "Grady, we'll hang you. Let him try." Caleb tightened his grip. Silas's eyes began to roll back. "Caleb!" Fiona screamed. Caleb didn't hear her. He was lost in the red haze of violence. He was going to kill the man. Right there. He was going to snap his neck. "Caleb, stop!" Fiona scrambled up and grabbed his arm. It was like grabbing a tree branch. Hard, immovable muscle. "Caleb, please don't kill him, not for me." Caleb froze. He blinked, looking down at Fiona. Her hands were clutching his forearm, her eyes filled with tears. "He's not worth it," she whispered. "Don't let them make you a murderer again." The tension in Caleb's body vibrated against her palms. Slowly, agonizingly, his grip loosened. He dropped Silas. The man crumpled to the dirt, gasping for air, clutching his broken hand. Caleb stepped back, looking at his own hands as if they didn't belong to him. He looked at Fiona, really looked at her, and she saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of Silas, but fear of himself. "Get out," Caleb said to the man on the ground. "Tell Grady next time he sends a dog, I'll send back a carcass." Silas scrambled up, cradling his hand, and ran towards the woods, stumbling and whimpering. Caleb didn't watch him go. He turned to Fiona. He saw the torn dress, the dirt on her cheek. He reached out a hand to touch her face, then pulled it back sharply. "I told you," he rasped, his voice breaking. "I told you I was dangerous." "You saved me," Fiona said. "I almost killed a man in front of you." He turned away, walking towards the barn. "Pack your things, Fiona. I'm taking you to the train station in the morning. This isn't a life. It's a war." Fiona didn't pack. Instead, she heated water on the stove. She tore strips of clean linen. And when Caleb finally came back inside from the barn hours later, she was sitting in the rocking chair, waiting. He stopped in the doorway. "I don't see a trunk. I'm not leaving," she said. "Did you not see what happened today?" Caleb threw his hat on the table. "Grady won't stop. That was a scout. Next time it'll be 5 men. 10. "Then we'll need more bullets," Fiona said calmly. "Sit down, Caleb." He looked at her, baffled. "What?" "You cut your hand on that man's teeth. Sit down." Caleb looked at his knuckles. They were split and bleeding. He sighed, a sound of defeat, and sat on the stool near the fire. Fiona took his hand. It was massive, rough, and calloused, dwarfing hers. She cleaned the wounds with warm water and whiskey. He hissed but didn't pull away. "Why?" he asked softly. "Why stay? I'm a scarred beast living on a rock." "My father drank," Fiona said, wrapping the linen around his hand. "He was a mean drunk. He used his fists on my mother, and then on me." "I know what a dangerous man looks like, Caleb." She looked up, meeting his dark eyes. "You have a rage in you, yes. But you used it to protect me. You stopped when I asked. A monster wouldn't have stopped." Caleb looked away, staring into the fire. "The scar," he said suddenly. "You wanted to know." Fiona tied the knot on the bandage. "Only if you want to tell me. It wasn't the war," he said. "It was after. I had a claim, down in Colorado. Had a wife too, Mary." Fiona's heart squeezed. She stayed silent. "A mining company wanted the claim. They sent men. I fought them off for weeks. One night I went to town for supplies. I came back." His voice went dead. The cabin was burning. They were waiting for me. They cut me, left me for dead in the snow. They thought I'd bleed out. He turned his hand over, gripping hers. "I didn't die. I hunted them. Took me 2 years. I found every single one of them, and I killed them. That's why they call me the Butcher. Not because I'm cruel, but because I finished the job. And Mary," Fiona whispered, "she died in the fire." A tear leaked out of his eye, getting lost in his beard. "I couldn't save her. I wasn't there." "You're here now," Fiona said fiercely. She reached up and touched the scar on his temple. He flinched, but he leaned into her touch. "You are here now, Caleb." The air in the cabin changed. The hostility, the distance. It evaporated, replaced by a magnetic pull. Caleb looked at her lips, then her eyes. "I promised I wouldn't touch you," he murmured. "Promises can be broken," Fiona breathed. He leaned in. His lips were rough, tasting of whiskey and grief. He kissed her tentatively at first, as if she were made of glass. But when Fiona sighed and wound her fingers into his beard, the kiss deepened. It became hungry, desperate, a reclaiming of life in the face of death. For the first time, the wind howling outside didn't sound lonely. It sounded like the world was trying to get in, and for the first time Fiona felt completely safe. But the peace was short-lived. 2 days later, the first blizzard of the season hit. It came with a fury, burying the cabin in 4 feet of snow overnight. They were snowed in. It was a time of domestic quiet. They talked. Caleb taught her how to clean his Winchester rifle. He showed her how to play chess. They slept in the same bed now, his heavy arm draped over her like a protective beam. But on the 4th day, the snow stopped, and as the silence returned, a new sound cut through the valley. The sound of a bugle. Caleb was at the window instantly. "That's not Grady." "Who is it?" "Cavalry," Caleb said, his face paling. "Or men dressed like them?" He grabbed his coat. "Stay inside, Fiona. Bar the door." He went out onto the porch. Fiona watched through the window. 4 men on horseback sat at the edge of the clearing. They wore the blue coats of the U.S. Marshals. "Caleb Kincaid!" the leader shouted. "We have a warrant!" "For what?" Caleb yelled back, his hand hovering near his pistol. "Murder of Silas Vane!" Fiona gasped. "He didn't die," she whispered to herself. "He ran away." "Silas Vane was found dead 3 days ago," the marshal shouted. "Neck snapped. Dumped in the ravine. Fits your style, butcher." "I didn't kill him," Caleb roared. "I broke his hand and sent him running." "Tell it to the judge and Helena. You're coming with us." Caleb looked back at the cabin. He looked at the window where Fiona was standing. If he fought, they would shoot, and the bullets would tear through the wood walls. Fiona could be hit. If he fought, he would kill these men. Men who might just be doing their job, misled by Grady. And he would truly be the monster they said he was. He slowly raised his hands. Fiona threw open the door. "No, it's a lie. He didn't kill him." "Fiona, go back inside," Caleb commanded, his voice sharp. "Ma'am, step back," the marshal said, drawing his weapon. "This man is a fugitive." 2 men dismounted and approached Caleb. They grabbed his arms, spinning him around. They shackled his wrists with heavy iron cuffs. "Caleb!" Fiona ran off the porch, grabbing his arm. "Listen to me," Caleb said, his eyes locking onto hers. "Do not go to town. Do not go to Grady. Stay here. Lock the door. I will come back. I swear on my soul, Fiona, I will come back. I can't let them take you. You have to survive," he whispered. "The gun is loaded. The knife is in the drawer." The marshals dragged him toward a horse. They hoisted him up, tying his feet beneath the belly of the animal. "Mr. Grady sends his regards, ma'am," one of the deputies sneered at Fiona, tipping his hat. And just like that, they took him. Fiona stood in the snow, watching the black dot of Caleb's figure disappear down the White Mountain Trail. She was alone again, but this time she wasn't the frightened girl who had arrived on the stagecoach. She walked back into the cabin. She went to the mantel. She picked up the daguerreotype of Mary. "I'll watch him for you," she whispered. Then she opened the drawer and took out the massive Bowie knife. She strapped it to her waist. She wasn't going to wait. Helena was a 3-day ride, but the marshals, paid for by Grady, didn't take Caleb to Helena. They took him to a holding cell in the back of the sheriff's office in Blackwater Creek, Grady's town. Caleb sat in the dark cell. The stone walls were damp. His wrists were raw from the irons. He knew the play. There would be no trial. He would try to escape during the transfer, and he would be shot in the back. Or a lynch mob would form tonight. He paced the small cell like a caged tiger. He had to get out. Not for himself. He had made his peace with death long ago. But for Fiona. Grady wouldn't leave her on the mountain. With Caleb gone, the land was unguarded. Fiona was unguarded. The thought made his blood boil so hot, he thought he might melt the chains. Clang. The door to the jailhouse opened. Hiram Grady walked in. He looked immaculate, smelling of bay rum and expensive tobacco. He held a handkerchief to his nose as he looked at Caleb through the bars. "A tragic end to a sad story," Grady said. "The butcher hanged for the murder of a poor defenseless drifter. I didn't kill him, Caleb growled. You had your men finish him off so you could pin it on me. Grady smiled. It was a reptile's smile. Details, Mr. Kincaid. Details. The point is, you are here, and the ridge is empty. If you touch her, Caleb said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than a scream, I will tear this town apart, brick by brick. I will drag you to hell with me. She's a pretty thing, Grady mused. Spirited. I like that. I think she'll find my hospitality. Persuasive. Once she realizes her husband is swinging from a rope. Grady turned to the sheriff, who was sitting at the desk avoiding Caleb's eyes. Sheriff, I want the prisoner transferred to the county seat at dawn. You know what to do. Yes, Mr. Grady. Grady left. Caleb gripped the bars. He tested them, iron, solid. He checked the window. Too small. He needed a miracle. The miracle arrived at midnight, but it didn't look like an angel. It looked like a fire. Outside, a commotion started. Shouts, the smell of smoke. Fire! The livery is on fire! Someone screamed. The sheriff jumped up. Damn it! He grabbed his keys and ran to the door, looking out. The orange glow illuminated the street. While the sheriff was distracted, the back door of the jailhouse, the one that led to the alley, creaked open. The sheriff spun around, hand on his gun. Who's there? A figure stepped out of the shadows, a woman. She was wearing men's trousers, a heavy coat, and a wide-brimmed hat. It was Fiona, and she was holding Caleb's Winchester rifle, leveled straight at the sheriff's chest. Open the cell, she said. Her voice didn't shake. Now, miss, the sheriff stammered, raising his hands. You don't want to do this. I am not a miss, Fiona said, cocking the lever of the rifle. Clack, clack. I am Mrs. Kincaid, and I said open the cell. The sheriff looked at her eyes. He saw the same steel he had seen in Caleb's. He slowly reached for the keys on his belt and tossed them to her. Get in the corner, she commanded. Fiona caught the keys. She didn't look at Caleb yet. She kept the gun on the sheriff until he was kneeling facing the wall. Then she rushed to the bars. Fiona, Caleb breathed. You crazy woman. I told you, she said, jamming the key into the lock. I keep my promises. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Caleb stepped out. He didn't hug her. There wasn't time. He grabbed the keys and unlocked his cuffs. Then he grabbed the sheriff, dragged him into the cell and locked the door. He turned to Fiona. She was trembling now, the adrenaline fading. He took the rifle from her, then cupped her face in his hands. He kissed her hard, a kiss that tasted of smoke and salvation. The livery? He asked. I set the hay bale on fire, she admitted. I made sure the horses were out first. Caleb actually laughed, a rough, rusty sound. You burned down the livery stable. It seemed the only way. We have to move, Caleb said, his face hardening. The whole town will be here in 5 minutes. They ran out the back door into the alley. Where are the horses? Tied behind the saloon, Fiona said. They sprinted through the mud. But as they rounded the corner of the saloon, a shot rang out. Bang! Dirt kicked up inches from Fiona's boot. There! A voice shouted. It was Grady's foreman. They're escaping! Go! Caleb shoved Fiona towards the horses. Bullets began to whine through the air. They were pinned down behind a water trough. We can't make the horses, Caleb shouted over the gunfire. We're cut off! The mine! Fiona pointed toward the edge of town, where the old abandoned silver mine entrance lay. We can cut through the tunnels to the ridge road. It's unstable. It's that or the rope, Caleb. Caleb looked at her. She was right. Run! They broke cover. Caleb fired 3 shots rapidly. Bam, bam, bam! Forcing the gunmen to duck. They sprinted for the dark maw of the mine entrance. They dove inside just as a hail of bullets chipped the stone around the entrance. Inside, it was pitch black and smelled of rot and damp earth. They won't follow us in here, Caleb whispered, leaning against the wall. Not in the dark. It's a maze. We need to get back to the cabin, Fiona said. We have the high ground there. No, Caleb said grimly in the dark. We can't go back. That's the first place they'll look. And they'll bring dynamite this time. Then where? Caleb took her hand. We hunt. What? Grady wants a war. Caleb's voice was cold, the voice of the butcher returning. I'm going to bring the war to his front door. Tonight ends this, one way or another. Fiona squeezed his hand. We, she corrected him. We end this. Caleb hesitated, then squeezed back. We. They moved deeper into the dark, leaving the town behind, moving not toward safety, but toward the biggest house on the hill, toward Hiram Grady's mansion. The mine tunnel exited into a ravine thick with brush, less than a half-mile from Hiram Grady's estate. The mansion sat on a rise overlooking the town, a sprawling Victorian monstrosity painted white, looking like a bleached skull in the moonlight. Caleb moved through the undergrowth with the silence of a ghost. Fiona followed, stepping where he stepped, her breathing shallow. She still gripped the Winchester, her knuckles white. He'll have guards, Caleb whispered, crouching behind a fallen oak. Men who don't care about the law, only the coin. How do we get in? Fiona asked. I go to the front, I draw them out. You go to the back, Caleb said, pointing towards the servants' entrance. Find Grady, hold him. Don't shoot unless you have to. You're using yourself as bait? Fiona hissed, grabbing his sleeve. That's suicide. No, that's hunting, Caleb said. He turned and looked at her, his eyes intense. If I fall, you run. You take the horse in his stable and you ride for the state line. Promise me. I am done running, Caleb. He touched her cheek one last time, then melted into the darkness. Minutes later, the night exploded. Caleb didn't just walk up to the front door. He kicked a lantern over in the stables, sending horses panicking into the yard. As the guards shouted and ran towards the chaos, Caleb opened fire from the tree line. He wasn't shooting to kill. Not yet. He was shooting to confuse. He shattered windows. He shot the bell off the porch. It's the butcher! Someone screamed. He's here! Gunfire erupted from the house, aimless and panicked. Fiona used the noise as cover. She slipped through the garden, finding the heavy oak door at the back. It was locked. She looked around, found a heavy stone, and wrapped it in the hem of her coat. She smashed the glass pane, reached in, and turned the latch. She was inside. The house smelled of lavender water and expensive cigars, a stark contrast to the violence outside. She moved down the hallway, the floorboards groaning softly. She heard heavy footsteps running toward the front of the house. She found the study. The double doors were ajar. Hiram Grady was there. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't running. He was stuffing papers into a leather satchel, a small Derringer pistol resting on the desk beside a crystal decanter of brandy. Fiona stepped into the room, raising the rifle. Mr. Grady. Grady froze. He looked up, his eyes widening slightly as he saw the woman in men's clothes, mud-streaked and fierce. Mrs. Kincaid, he drawled, though his hand twitched towards the pistol. You have a bad habit of showing up where you aren't invited. Step away from the desk, Fiona commanded. Her arms shook from the weight of the rifle, but her aim was true. You won't shoot, Grady scoffed. You're a city girl, a seamstress. You don't have the stomach for cold blood. I've spent 2 months on the mountain, Fiona said, her voice dropping. I've skinned rabbits, I've gutted fish, and I've seen what you did to my husband. Outside, the gunfire had stopped. Silence, heavy and terrifying, settled over the house. Your husband is dead by now, Grady smiled cruelly. My men are efficient. The door behind Fiona creaked. She spun around, fearing a guard. But it was Caleb. He was bleeding. A dark stain spread across his left shoulder, and blood dripped from his forehead, masking one eye. He held his Colt revolver loosely at his side. He looked like a nightmare walking. Caleb! Fiona gasped. Grady's face lost all its color. He snatched up the Derringer. Don't! Caleb barked. Grady fired. The small bullet hit Caleb in the chest, staggering him back against the doorframe. No! Fiona screamed. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She pulled the trigger of the Winchester. Boom! The shot went wide, shattering the mirror behind Grady. But the distraction was enough. Caleb roared, ignoring the bullet in his chest, and charged. He crossed the room in 2 strides. Grady tried to cock the pistol again, but Caleb swatted it away like a toy. Caleb's hand, the hand of the butcher, closed around Grady's throat. He slammed the wealthy man onto the desk, scattering papers and spilling the brandy. "You wanted the land," Caleb shouted, spit and blood flying. "Why? Why kill for rocks and dirt?" "Silver," Grady choked out, clawing at Caleb's iron grip. "The survey. Under the ridge. The motherlode runs right under your cabin. Millions, Kincaid. Millions." Caleb froze. "You killed Silas. You burned me out. For silver." "It's the way of the world," Grady gasped. Caleb raised his fist. He could end it. One strike. He could crush Grady's skull and be done with it. The rage that had lived in him for years, the fire that had taken Mary, it all screamed for blood. "Caleb, don't!" Fiona's voice cut through the red haze. She was by his side, her hands on his arm. "If you kill him like this, you're what they say you are. Don't do it for him. Do it for us." Caleb trembled. He looked at Grady's pathetic, terrified face. Then he looked at Fiona. He released the grip. Grady slumped back, gasping for air, rubbing his bruised throat. "You're not worth the hangman," Caleb spat. You can't prove anything," Grady wheezed, sitting up, regaining his arrogance. "I own the sheriff. I own the judge. You broke out of jail. You're a dead man." "Actually," a deep voice boomed from the hallway. The U.S. Marshal stood there, his gun drawn. Behind him stood the sheriff, looking pale and handcuffed. "We heard enough," the marshal said, stepping into the room. "The sheriff here decided to cut a deal when we found out about the money Grady wired to his account. He told us about Silas, and we just heard the rest from the horse's mouth." Grady slumped, defeated. Caleb turned to Fiona. The adrenaline that had been holding him up vanished. His knees buckled. "Caleb!" Fiona caught him as he fell, guiding him to the floor. She ripped open his shirt. The bullet from the derringer had hit a rib. It was messy, but it wasn't near his heart. "You startle easy, mountain man," she cried, tears finally spilling over, mixing with the blood on his chest. Caleb looked up at her, his vision blurring. He reached up with a bloody hand and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Only to those who'd hurt you," he whispered. Then the darkness took him. The winter of 1886 descended upon the Montana Territory with the weight of a judgment. It was a season the elders in the valley would speak of for decades, a whiteout that buried fence posts and froze the breath in a man's lungs before he could exhale. The wind screamed through the canyons like a banshee, tearing at the shingles and piling snow 10 feet deep against the rough-hewn logs of the cabin on the ridge. But inside, the world was soft, warm, and smelling of yeast and pine resin. Fiona sat in the rocking chair, the rhythmic creak thump providing a counter-melody to the howling gale outside. She was mending one of Caleb's heavy woolen coats, the needle flashing in the firelight. She wasn't the terrified girl who had stepped off the stagecoach months ago, clutching a reticule and a prayer. Her hands were rougher now, her skin kissed by the mountain sun, and her eyes held a quiet, unshakable strength. The heavy iron latch on the door lifted. The wind tried to batter its way in, swirling snow across the floorboards until a massive shoulder shoved the door shut against the storm. Caleb Kincaid stood there, shaking the snow from his duster. He looked like a creature born of the blizzard, beard frosted white, eyes narrowed against the glare. He moved a little slower this season. The bullet from Grady's derringer had cracked a rib and torn muscle, and on the bitter cold days, the ache was a constant companion. It was a physical reminder of the night they had walked into the lion's den and burned it down. He hung his coat on the peg and walked to the fire, rubbing his massive hands together. The heat radiated off the stone hearth, the same hearth where he had once sat alone, haunted by the ghost of a wife he couldn't save. "Drifts are cresting the barn roof," Caleb rumbled, his voice a low gravel that vibrated in the small room. "Had to dig a tunnel just to get to the mule." "The soup is hot," Fiona said softly, biting the thread to snap it, "and the bread is fresh." Caleb turned to look at her. The scar that bisected his face, the mark that had earned him the name the Butcher, was softened by the orange glow of the embers. He walked over to her, his movements careful, almost reverent. He didn't sit. He knelt. It was a posture of submission that no man in town would ever believe of Caleb Kincaid. "You should be resting," he murmured, his eyes dropping to her lap. "I'm pregnant, Caleb, not invalid," Fiona smiled, reaching out to weave her fingers through his damp beard. He flinched, just slightly, an old reflex. He took her hand in his, engulfing her small fingers in a grip that could snap a rifle stock, but now held her as if she were made of spun glass. "I worry," he admitted, the confession dragging out of him. "This mountain, it's no place for a child. It's hard. It's dangerous." "The world is dangerous, Caleb," Fiona corrected him gently. "Down in the valley, Hiram Grady thought he was safe in his mansion. Now he's rotting in a territorial prison cell, and we are here." The resolution of the Grady affair had sent shockwaves through the territory. The U.S. Marshal's testimony had been damning. Grady was gone, his empire dismantled. As for the silver vein that ran beneath their feet, the blood silver that had caused so much pain, Caleb had made a choice that baffled the greedy but satisfied the soul. He had leased the mining rights to a reputable firm from the east, but with a strict clause: no surface mining within 2 miles of the cabin. The royalties were modest, but they were enough to ensure that the Kincaid family would never know hunger again. "The town asked about you today," Caleb said, shifting the topic. "The new storekeep, Mr. Evans. He asked if Mrs. Kincaid needed any fabric ordered from Chicago." Mrs. Kincaid, Fiona tested the name. It still thrilled her. They had married 3 weeks after the shooting, in a quiet ceremony in the Valley Church. The pews had been full. Not because Caleb was loved, not yet, but because he was respected. When he walked down the street now, men didn't cross to the other side out of fear. They tipped their hats out of deference. He was no longer the butcher. He was the man who had brought down the tyrant. Caleb rested his forehead against her knees. "I never thought I'd have this. I thought my life was just winter. Just cold. And now?" "Now," he whispered, pressing a kiss to the fabric of her dress, right over the swell of her stomach where their child grew. "Now it's harvest time." Fiona watched him, her heart swelling so full she thought it might burst. She remembered the warnings of the stagecoach driver. She remembered the fear in the eyes of the townspeople. "He's a monster," they had said. "He's dangerous." They had been right, in a way. He was dangerous. He was a loaded gun, a drawn knife, a storm waiting to break. Caleb looked up, his dark eyes shimmering with an emotion he had no words for. He placed his large, calloused hand flat against her belly. He waited. And then, a small, distinct kick pushed against his palm. The mountain man's eyes widened. A breath hitched in his chest. A smile, genuine, unguarded, and painfully beautiful, broke across his scarred face. "He's strong," Caleb choked out. "Like his father," Fiona whispered. She leaned forward, cupping his face, tracing the jagged line of the scar with her thumb. "They told me you were dangerous," she reminded him, her voice barely louder than the crackling fire. Caleb turned his head, kissing her palm, his eyes locking onto hers with a ferocity that burned hotter than the stove. "I am," he vowed, the steel returning to his voice, not as a threat, but as a promise. "To the wolf, to the storm, to anyone who would try to take this away." Fiona leaned back, satisfied, as the wind howled impotently outside their walls. "I know," she said, closing her eyes as his head rested back against her. "That's why I stayed." The snow continued to fall, burying the past, burying the blood, and leaving the world white and clean for the life that was just beginning. And that, my friends, is the legend of Fiona Miller and Caleb Kincaid. History books might not mention the gunfight at Grady's mansion, and you won't find the name The Butcher in the official census. But if you go to the old cemetery in Blackwater Creek, past the rows of crumbling headstones, you'll find two markers side by side under a massive oak tree. One says Caleb and the other Fiona, and carved into the stone connecting them is a simple inscription, "Fear no evil." It serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes the people society casts out as monsters are simply protectors waiting for something worth saving, and that love, when forged in fire and blood, is the strongest weapon of all. If you enjoyed this story of grit, survival, and romance in the Wild West, please do me a huge favor. Smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And subscribe so you don't miss our next saga. Share this video with someone who loves a good old-fashioned love story. Until next time, keep your powder dry.